of course, you're a candidate for office. So the first question that everybody asks you is, tell me about yourself and why you're running for this seat.
Thank you for that. There's a lot to get started and dig into there. So I grew up really in a family that struggled, and we are still dealing with the struggles that a lot of families do. I grew up moving around southeastern Pennsylvania to a single mom, and we moved around so much because we were always trying to stay one step ahead of eviction notices. We also struggled to put food on the table and just pay for heating oil. Those basic fundamental things I watched my mom really struggle with. So that sense of building out your family and making sure you have the right resources to live a good life and a life with dignity is something I've seen firsthand and struggled with my family. And I know we have a lot of families in our community that struggle with that as well. And so to find some opportunity for myself, I joined the Army at 17. I needed an age waiver, and I did so by going through West Point. The way I got into the academy was through my community again. My next door neighbor was a high school teacher who really saw that potential in me and helped me with my application. So that sense of community support is a really strong value in me, and it's something I want to bring to this seat here in our district. And after I commissioned from West Point, I became an attack helicopter pilot. But I think much more importantly, I was a commander. I led several hundred soldiers overseas and here at home, and I saw firsthand my soldiers struggle with things like paying for food. A lot of them were on food stamps, or they had their third kid and they couldn't afford childcare, and they were deploying and they were worried about their families. So those issues, again, that we know people in our district are dealing with, I've already had to solve as a commander. And I look forward to working on those problems now as our representative, God bless it, in November. And I think right now we have a leader who is leaving this community behind. And seeing that, I knew that was my call to action, to step up to the plate and to put even a heavier point on it, especially after what we saw on January 6th. I mean, that was Americans now seeing other Americans as the enemy. And I think it's really important to have young leaders, next generation leaders, but especially veterans now stepping up and running for office and saying, we are not going to go back. We need to heal this country, and we need to bring some common sense to Washington and those who actually want to get things done. And that is exactly why I'm running.
Speaking of where you're from in the southeastern Pennsylvania, tell me a little bit about the district. I mean, obviously, a lot of people that might watch this are from Bucks County or maybe Montgomery County. But tell me a little bit about the district and your Republican opponent.
Yeah, so I will always start with my Republican opponent is now out of touch with this district. And that is something that as I talk about this community, I want everyone to keep first and foremost. We currently have an elected official who is taking votes and making comments that are completely out of line with what this community wants and what this community deserves. And so Pennsylvania's First is, for those who are listening who are outside the area, is geographically just outside Philadelphia. So it's northeast of the city, and it's a really great community. It encompasses all of Bucks County and the eastern portion of Montgomery County. And the really important thing here is we have a lot of new families trying to move into the district and get established and take advantage of the really good schools we have here, the wonderful history that we have here, and being able to live with dignity, as I said before, is something that's really important to me. And our community is getting to a point where we have some really established families, but these younger families are finding it really hard to find root. And it's because cost of living is going up. We have an elected official who's taking votes that are not helping that whatsoever. And now we are finally getting to a point where that is bubbling over and people are absolutely ready for a change. Because Bucks County, Montgomery County, PA-01 at large is moving in a really wonderful blue direction. And right now having a Republican in the seat is not making the cut, especially one who is taking votes that go completely against what the community wants.
Yeah. So your opponent is a self-described moderate. I vehemently disagree with that perspective. I'm sure you might as well. So tell me a little bit about some votes that would distinguish you from your opponent.
Yes, yeah. Let's start going after that narrative that he gives himself, and let's start with affordability for families here. I've mentioned it a few times, and it's because it's so important. Everyone is struggling right now. So Brian Fitzpatrick, the gentleman I am running against, he saw that families were struggling to make ends meet, and he voted against holding gas and oil companies accountable for price gouging at the pump. He saw the issues. He saw the prices rising. He knew families who, especially those who have to travel for work, were really struggling to afford gas. And he said, that's fine. Keep those prices moving up. So when we start really looking at affordability, that's one. He voted against holding them accountable. I would have held them accountable. We can also look at where all that started for him. He voted in support of the 2017 Trump tax cuts. So a lot of what families are dealing with now in 2022 can be traced back to that, which basically that gave tax cuts for the rich. Let's be honest, for the very wealthy few, which is not a lot of the families, especially in the lower part of our district, those tax cuts never reached them. And in fact, they are now facing some of those repercussions. So that is something he supported. I absolutely would not have supported because it only benefits the very top earners there. And then I think that the major issue that is in front of us right now, talking about reproductive rights and also talking about limiting gun violence and decreasing gun violence. Those are two issues where he has absolutely not shown leadership. And I know we're going to talk about Roe a little bit more in a minute, so I will save my comments for then. Boy, there are a lot. But speaking on gun violence, so he has been incredibly reluctant to speak out against gun violence. I mean, we've had, at this point, I've lost count of how many mass shootings we have had, but obviously Buffalo, Uvalde, those were massive and devastating. And in the midst of that, we had Brian Fitzpatrick voting against the domestic terrorism prevention bill, a bill that he initially co-sponsored because he wanted to look like the good guy, and then he turned around and voted against. So that way, depending on which room he was in, he could pretend like he supported their values when really he supports no one's values, let alone the ones that this community has. And when we talk about what are the next steps around gun violence, we can pass universal background checks. We can make sure assault rifles, AKA weapons of war, are banned. And these are things that Brian won't do. So I will pause there because I know we're going to dig into Roe, but those are some of the big ones. Making life more affordable, going after the tax cuts that benefit the rich, and then, of course, addressing the public health crisis that is gun violence.
And not to derail us here for a second, but just to point out I'm a CPA for anybody that watches this. So for perspective, these tax cuts were 2.9% for the top bracket of individual earners, which equates to billions of dollars that you and I did not get, your children did not get in services. And corporate tax rates were cut 14%. 14% when already companies didn't pay their fair share, let alone what they actually, the nominal rates that they're supposed to pay. But even with all the breaks, they're paying from 35 to 21%. So if Netflix is paying less in taxes than you, I think you probably should be a little amped up about that. So
I think that was a great way of putting it. It's all about fairness.
Yes.
And right now we have a system that is not fair, and Brian Fitzpatrick supports an unfair system. Yeah.
So going back, of course, to the giant elephant in the room, and pardon the pun, I guess, but the reaction to Roe being overturned has been pivotal, I think, for leading into this election, how Democrats react. So let's just dive into it. What do you think that Democrats should do? What do you plan on doing? And what has the current Congress maybe been lacking that once you get there, you can help lead forward?
Great question. And I would love to start from a place of how it affects our community and then really talk about it from there. So since Roe has been overturned, I have had so many, especially young women, come up to me, some of whom have been in tears, and say, please, you need to win. not just I want you to win, it would be great if you did. It's a need now, and it's just visceral for so many in our community. And when we look at who it affects the most, in Pennsylvania's first district, those who live at, or the demographic that most lives at or below the poverty line is women aged 25 to 34. So that means those who will be hardest hit by this decision are those who are already struggling the most. And I really want to highlight that because it's not just me that knows that statistic. The gentleman I am running against is also well aware of that. And he saw that, and yet he voted against codifying Roe v. Wade last fall. So I really want to unpack some of his votes just to make sure we're crystal clear on what our current representative set forth for us. So last fall, he voted against codifying Roe v. Wade at the federal level. He has vowed in previous statements to defund Planned Parenthood, a critical provider of a lot of health care for women. And he has also supported legislation that would make abortions really, really difficult, even in the case of threat to a mother's life, and in many cases of rape or incest. So that's what we're talking about when we look at the decisions our current elected official has made for this community. So let's start there. I absolutely would have voted to codify Roe v. Wade. And when we look at what we still can do, if we hold on to our majority in Congress, and I think to get us in safer territory, expand that majority, we can codify Roe at the federal level. We can absolutely get that through. And that will be a priority of mine completely. As a service member, as someone who was willing to, let's put it bluntly, die for our country overseas, to come back home and have my rights taken away from me has been a really emotional experience. So when I start looking at what my priorities will be when I'm elected, this will absolutely be one of them, because I'm not going to remain a second-class citizen in my own country, and nor do I want my community to suffer as well. And I think right now what the Biden administration has done in the recent executive order, especially protecting pills and different pharmaceuticals and protecting the access to those, I think that is a really crucial first step. But the biggest and best thing we can do is hold on to and expand our majority in the Congress, because that is how we can codify this.
Absolutely. And I think for the last maybe month and a half, every single time that we've discussed anything, whether it be the Supreme Court, guns, overturning of Roe, I've talked about literally we have to elect people like you to Congress. We have to elect John Fetterman to the Senate. We have to elect Josh Shapiro to be our governor, because it's all entangled. Like, all of these things are interconnected, and the election is contingent upon this stuff, and it goes from the local all the way up to the federal. So we really do have to focus on who we're electing and what they actually stand for.